Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I've been a yoga teacher now for over 15 years while raising my 3 kids who are quickly actually becoming young adults. Less kids, more young adults. And I feel like I've learned a lot along the way as a parent, but also as an entrepreneur. There was a place in my business where this was my sole income. This is all I relied on to feed me and my 3 kids. And it was in that time that I really figured out that I needed to specialize, which many of you know I talk about a lot, niching down. I also needed to very much run this like a business. And there were times where emotionally, physically, financially, I was coming to either that brownout or burnout point. And when I started to figure things out, yoga teachers started reaching out to me to ask me if I could help them with specific things in their yoga business. And that's really where the consultation side of things grew in my own business. And at this point, as I'm recording this for you, I've put consultations on the side burner right now. I'm not doing one-on-one consultations because I'm working on some pretty big projects for all of you. But this podcast, this is why it was born. It's here for you each and every week so that you can stay connected to information, ideas, inspiration, and really this support as you build your unique yoga business. And also, I'm not sure if you're already part of our Facebook group. We have the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. It's an amazing place to jump into and ask questions. In that Facebook group, we have over 10,000 yoga teachers from around the world, and it is such an amazing and supportive space. So pop your questions in there, and also as you put your question in there, scroll through and see if there's something that you can help another yoga teacher with. Today's episode and next week's episode go together really nicely, and it was because we were getting a lot of comments and questions about body positive yoga and what to do when students with abundant bodies come to class. Now, you might have heard about body positive yoga before, and you think, well, yeah, that's what yoga is all about, is being positive in our body. But I really want you to have a listen with fresh ears today and next week as well to these episodes, because I think they both give us so much of a new perspective on how we can create really inclusive, braver yoga spaces. I love how I'm seeing this body positivity everywhere I look. You know, I was shopping online with my daughter, and I'll tell you, that doesn't happen very often. I don't enjoy shopping in person or online. I needed to buy some things and I was really asking for her help. And I love how she's like, I like this website better than this one. And I could see the definite difference of body positivity on the one website. And I was so excited to see that that's what we were choosing to support. So this is not only a conversation for the yoga world, but it definitely comes into the yoga world because it's aiming to empower individuals regardless of their physical weight or size, and also really challenging the ways in which society presents and views the physical body. And you know, that's what we're about here on the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, in the Connected Yoga Teacher group. We really are looking at how can we focus on accepting all bodies, regardless of their physical ability, their size, their gender, their race, their appearance. I also love how I met today's guest in a Facebook group, and there was a definite connection. I'm so glad that we formed that connection. Gillian McCollum joins me today to talk more about body positive yoga, what it means, what it entails, and how it can be a really beneficial approach. We talk about what it means to really, truly create inclusive and accessible spaces for our yoga students, as well as some of the challenges and mindset issues that we might have around sharing body positive yoga. Now remember, we take the notes for you, so you can find all of the show notes over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/218. So if we talk about a link, if you want to go back and scroll back and look at the topics, We actually have clickable timestamps so you can be like, oh, right, they started talking about that thing. That's right at that spot. Before we get right to the interview, I want to give a special shout out to the team over at Schedulicity who helps me each and every day to keep my calendar organized. If you have not checked out Schedulicity, I highly recommend that you do. And if you'd like, we actually have a whole article that breaks down different time management software, and it was inspired by all of you connected yoga teachers voting and telling us what scheduling software you love and use, and Crunch put that all together in an article. I'll make sure that we link to that in the show notes. And for now, let's hear the hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga Teachers. This is Michaela with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Schedulicity is an amazing accounting tool. Your dashboard shows your weekly estimated revenue, the number of bookings you have, and the average revenue per booking. Enabling the payment add-on makes things even easier. Once you're connected to Stripe or Square, all your transactions will be listed on your payment screen, and you can select a date range, search by tender type or confirmation number, and export that information to an Excel document. With your schedule and your money this organized, you might have time to tackle something even tougher, like that weird junk drawer or your kid's closet.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity. Now let's dive in and get right into today's episode with Gillian, who is an anti-diet, food and body freedom coach and body positive yoga teacher. After years of struggling with body shame, yo-yo dieting, and binge eating, Gillian came to yoga as a way to cope and find peace and freedom with food and her body. She completed her yoga teacher training in 2017 and since then has been helping people get off the diet roller coaster and start feeling good in their bodies. Gillian describes her mission as helping women find lasting peace and freedom with food and their body. Through her group and private coaching sessions, as well as body positive yoga, Gillian aims to create spaces where all bodies are celebrated and respected, and to be particularly supportive for those who struggle with body confidence and self-acceptance. So let's learn more about body positive yoga with Gillian. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Gillian. It's fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, Shannon.
So tell our listeners, what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
Yeah. So I am both a yoga teacher and a food and body freedom coach, specifically an anti-diet food and body freedom coach. So those two intersect actually really quite well. The work that I do is helping women overcome their food issues. So specifically around binge eating, food and body preoccupation, body shame, that kind of stuff. And that was my story, right? So I coach women around that because that's what I struggled with for probably about 15 years. And one of the best tools that I discovered during that time that really helped me come out of that pretty troubling time was yoga. And I was so fortunate to discover yoga in what I now appreciate to be a very inclusive space. But I also appreciate how differently, equally, it could have turned out had that not been my experience.
Right. Okay, so talk a little bit about that because here's something that I hear from a lot of our yoga teacher listeners. They will say, well, I feel like I don't fit the yoga image. Or I hear that from our students as well. I can't do yoga, I'd have to lose a bunch of weight. Or I can't do yoga because you have to be vegan. I mean, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions, I think, out there in the world, in our yoga teacher community and in our yoga student community. So do you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really agree. I think I see it play out in two different ways. One, I have students and coaching clients who are terrified to even enter the space because they feel like it's just not for them. And for my clients, it's largely around body size, body shape, body ability or capability, whether that's strength or flexibility, or whatever. But it's also just like, I don't have the right gear. I don't have maybe the money. Whatever it is, there's so many barriers to entry. And then there's a whole other group of folks who have maybe tried yoga and had a bad experience. And whether that's because they as I referenced at the beginning, I just happened to stumble upon a very inclusive space. But a lot of teachers that I find, I've never come across a teacher yet who has not wanted to be inclusive or not wanted to be welcoming or wanted to ever be a barrier to entry. That's, I think yoga teachers are inherently very kind, welcoming, inclusive people, big-hearted people. But unless yoga teachers are specifically trained to be inclusive and accessible and all the logistics and practicalities that are included within that, then combined with, if they also perhaps don't have the life experience of being in a bigger body, then how can they possibly truly be inclusive to the degree that I think it needs to be if we want to encourage people into the space that have these really firm beliefs of it's not for them. They're not welcome in the space.
This is so good. I have a few questions swimming around in my mind now, but I'll try and... So first of all, you teach what you call, I think, body positive yoga. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's how you define it. And then what does that mean?
So for me, what it means is I like to create my spaces, whether they're in person or online as they are right now, to be inclusive from the perspective of so financially accessible for a start. I offer sliding scale. I offer students almost like a sample class before they come to me so that they really know and they understand what a class looks like, so that there's that fear specifically around what I was just speaking to you about earlier off mic, about how now I've dropped this drop-in model and I work with students over a six week period. If someone has never practiced yoga before, that's a really daunting prospect to sign up to a 6-week, yoga journey. So I like to offer a sample class to people free of charge so that they can get a sneak peek what's on the other side, right? And really demonstrate what I mean by inclusivity and accessibility. So yes, that's everything from variations of poses for students of different abilities. So whether that's strength or mobility or balance, using all the tools, all the props that help us with all those things, but also the type of language that I use in class, and also to give options, suggestions, variations for people in bigger bodies. Because that's really the piece that I'm actually most passionate about, because my body's changed a lot since I began practicing yoga. I have always been in a bigger body, but I was always taught by teachers in smaller bodies. And it was like I cannot tell you what the day, I must have been practicing yoga for about 4 years, I want to say. And my regular teacher, who I'd been taught by for the whole 4 years, who was very inclusive, I have to say, very much so in her language, in the variations, everything really. But she was in a smaller body. So as I said earlier, her lived experience combined with the training that she'd done didn't extend to accommodate someone in a bigger body. So she went on retreat and we had a substitute teacher come in who was in a larger body. And after class, I said to her, I really struggle with seated twists. I kind of feel like stuff just gets in the way, doesn't feel all that successful for me. And she said to me, well, do you move that stuff out the way? And my jaw just hit the floor. Because I was like, what do you mean? I'm allowed to touch my body and move my belly and move my breast, and like, that's okay to do that in a yoga class? I'd never seen anyone do that before. I'd never been invited to do that before. I didn't know it was okay. And that changed everything for me, truly. I was like, gosh, I'm actually allowed to take ownership of this practice. I'm allowed to make it my own. I'm allowed to recognize where I'm getting, where there's hurdles, where I'm getting tripped up, what's stopping me from, accessing, a forward fold a little deeper, let's say. And it often wasn't my hamstrings or my flexibility, it was my belly. And that was really empowering. And I think if I can offer that invitation along with some suggestions to my students so that they can take ownership of their own practice, then that's what I'm most passionate about.
That's amazing. I love that story of the seated twist and how this one thing that this yoga teacher said to you made it so that you felt really empowered in your own practice. So I've heard you mention like being in a bigger body and teaching, and that's part of it, and that's your passion and sort of your specialty in this. Does that mean that anyone who teaches body positive yoga needs to be in a larger body or needs to be teaching people who are in a larger body?
Great question. I don't think it does, because I think there's a lot that extends beyond body size. I think creating an environment that's affirming, right? So no matter what you come to the class, to the mat with, to be affirming, because in my coaching practice, I don't just work with women in bigger bodies. I worked with women of a body size all the way across throughout the spectrum. So I know to feel shame around your body isn't exclusive to people in bigger bodies, right? You can feel very not at home, full of shame in any size of body. So no, I don't think it's about just catering to people in bigger bodies. I think it's about creating an affirming environment, an environment that allows students to feel empowered, feel like they have agency, feel like they can advocate for their own needs, and develop that, what I call in my coaching practice, that body sovereignty, right? That feeling of safety, I suppose, in their own body. And that's, that should be available to everyone, not just folks in bigger bodies.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And you also said if we haven't had an experience as a yoga teacher in a larger body, to look for a training that focuses on that accessibility. Are there any that you really suggest to yoga teachers when they say, this is the work I want to do? Or people who are living in a larger body but have really been trained in yoga teacher training where maybe they didn't learn accessibility?
Yeah, and I think for the most part, most 200-hour teacher trainings don't teach too much around accessibility, which is kind of staggering because, shouldn't the very first principle or foundation of yoga be that it should be available to all? But, and that's probably a whole other podcast episode for us to talk about. That's a huge issue. Like the fact that right now teachers, the onus is on the teacher to then seek out additional training. In my 200-hour teacher training, we covered, I think maybe, I want to say 4 hours maybe of pregnancy. So how to work with a student who's pregnant. Now, when you think of the amount of people who, when I say people, I mean students, that may find themselves pregnant in a yoga class, compared to the amount of people that come to a yoga class in a body, like, I just feel like, surely we should be teaching accessibility before we teach around pregnancy. That's my view anyway. But anyway, so the training that I sought, which I highly recommend to any of your teachers, is a training called Yoga for All training. And it's taught by Amber Carnes and Diane Bondi. So I loved that training. I felt like it was a terrific mixture of training to teach students in larger bodies, but also there was kind of touched on being trauma sensitive as well. So it was a great combination. I would highly recommend it. It offered me so much. It gave me tools, but it also just gave me inspiration to feel really enabled to look at any pose. So, the theory behind a lot of what Amber talks about is, what's the point of the pose, right? And I say this to my students. I say, you're not coming to class to make your body look like my body. You're not coming to class so that you can mirror what I do. That's not the point of why we're here, right? So I really like to sort of hand that or pass that question over to my students and ask them, like, why are you here? I know that sounds really big and really kind of philosophical, but really, why are you here? And when you get down to it, it's not about them striking the same pose as me. There's absolutely no point in that whatsoever. So it sparks my imagination when I think, what's the point of the pose? And it helps me when I have a student who says, I have trouble bearing weight on my wrists, or I don't like to be on my knees, it's uncomfortable, or whatever it may be. I then think, well, if this is the posture or the pose, or this is the part of the body, or this is the theme for today's class, how can I take that and make it accessible for these folks with these different injuries or conditions or whatever it might be? And you're only limited by your imagination. More and more I found, as I have since I did my 200-hour teacher training to now, I feel like I'm kind of breaking those molds of like traditional alignment cues. And even like, I was thinking the other day, like how much I don't like to be confined to the rectangle of my mat. I even find that a little bit too restrictive, right? Like in child's pose, I like to take my knees beyond the mat. And I question, how many of my students feel like they have to stay within the parameters of the mat. It's kind of symbolic, right? Like, how much do we like to stay in our box and not feel like we can take up space and spill beyond that? So I'm on the lookout for a mat manufacturer that do like bigger sizes, because I feel that would be really liberating for me and maybe my students as well.
It's so true. I've seen those big circle ones, but I think what you're saying is like a mat that is a larger size and still kind of fits the conformity of some type of rectangular square.
Yeah.
And that's our mat producers out there should be listening to this for sure.
I hope so.
I wanted to also highlight what you said about the sample class and the accessibility. I had not thought about this, and my mind is spinning now in terms of so many things in making it accessible. Of what's scary about yoga is you don't know what's going to happen. Like if you show up and everybody's chanting for 15 minutes at the start of class and you've never done that, or there's meditation and you've never sat still, or so many things, so many unknowns of like, what might that be like? And then to be able to decide with that sample class, I think that's brilliant. So how long is your sample class?
I just did a 30-minute class, just recorded it, put it up on YouTube, didn't list it publicly, sent the link to my email list. And even if that's all they do, but, I was hearing you talk there about chanting and meditation. And I was thinking, because you were saying, people are worried about like what happens once I arrive in class or I log on to the Zoom call, like what happens on the other side. It feels very closed door. And when I was hearing you talk there, I was thinking, even these words, chanting, meditation, like even if you're very explicit in your marketing, your website, your flyer, whatever it is, even those words can feel really intimidating, right? So I think this sample class of like, this is actually what it looks like. This is what we might be doing. And I don't know, maybe even not using some of those words might be helpful to invite people in, because really, like, I guess it's different for all teachers and across the world, I suppose. But for me, the meditation aspect is really just taking some time, some quiet stillness to just arrive on our mat, arrive into our bodies. And maybe by calling that meditation, it automatically turns people off.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that there are so many websites I go to, and if I wasn't a yoga teacher, it would look very different to me. Like I will get people who are not yoga teachers to take a look at something and to just give some feedback. It is harder and harder because I have a lot of yoga teachers in my circle, but yoga teachers love to use the language of yoga and talk about things that they covered in their yoga teacher training. And if they're marketing to other yoga teachers, amazing. Or I think it's just as important if it was like we do 30 minutes of chanting and then 30 minutes of meditation, it would be very important that that sample video show that, and then there are people who are looking for that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I think that's great. I'm also super curious if it's a freebie on your website.
Do you know, thank you for that tip. But no, it's not currently. But guess what I'm going to be doing after this? It's actually not. But because, I guess I tend to market mainly through my email list. But I think that's a great idea. Thanks, Shannon. I will take that on board.
I'm thinking about it for my own business, and I was curious if you had that. So then what are some of the things that you think yoga teachers, well, let's back up for 1 minute. I want to cover one other question that's been floating around so much with the yoga teachers I work with our yoga teachers in the Connected Yoga Teacher group. All the time they'll say, I don't want to do video because I don't think I look the part of the yoga teacher. Do you want to? Yeah.
Whoa, that really, I feel that when you say that, because I think, that's so true. And actually, if you don't mind, what really springs to mind is I actually work with a lot of yoga teachers in my coaching practice. So yoga teachers who probably feel the body shame more because of because of what they do as a yoga teacher. And I work with them on the coaching side. That's such an interesting concept. It's so interesting. It's kind of like the equivalent to walking into a studio, which I've never taught in, but I used to practice as a student in a studio with mirrors all around. And I think it just, same with video, like with Zoom right now, it kind of takes us out of our bodies, right? Whether we're a student or whether we're a teacher, it doesn't really matter. It starts to externalize our experience, right? So rather than feeling the yoga, we're seeing the yoga, and that can be really distracting. And I don't know, maybe I've been doing this work long enough that I'm now in a place that it doesn't bother me at all. But definitely, I guess if you'd asked me that question, if I ever suffered from that sort of negative body image or those critical thoughts as I watch myself either live or playback recorded, I probably would have. It probably would have been a big hurdle for me. But now I feel like the message and what I'm trying to do, my mission, is so much bigger than my body. And that's what I just keep coming back to. Again, with my big philosophical questions, why are you here as a yoga teacher? What's your purpose? And I would suspect the answer to that question for most of us, for most teachers, the answer is going to be so much bigger than it being about ourselves and our bodies. And even if you aren't the most confident person, what a great message, what a great role model to your students to acknowledge that and maybe even discuss it, but show up anyway. Show up anyway and demonstrate that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's also okay to be imperfect. And I think there's so much benefit to students when teachers show up imperfectly, particularly in the body image realm. I think seeing a yoga teacher, and this isn't to be critical of yoga teachers that do fit the kind of stereotype of what yoga teachers look like, but I almost think if you don't fit that stereotype, maybe you look more welcoming, maybe you look more approachable, perhaps. Maybe you look more human. I've been having it's interesting. I've been having a lot of these discussions with, as I say, my yoga teachers who are also clients. And my question to them is, if you're going to, not my question, my kind of concept or idea that I put forward to them is, well, in all the ways that you think you're not showing up or you're not perfect enough or you're not ticking those boxes because your body doesn't fit, if you're going to play the comparison game, be fair about it and also ask the question, what are you bringing if you're not ticking all those boxes? If you're not matching up to, the tall, blonde, white, flexible, able-bodied stereotype, what are you bringing because of that? And for me, I feel like there's so many of those boxes. There's so many I do tick, but there's also some that I don't tick. And I actually feel like it's the ones that I don't tick that make me a more approachable, interesting, hopefully helpful and supportive yoga teacher.
What is the reaction then that you get? I know that you share lots of videos, even on your Instagram. And what's the reaction then that you get from people? Or do they see that and then they think, oh yeah, I saw that and now I'm signing up for your class? Do you ever hear the feedback on that side of things?
Yeah, I do. I hear the word that comes up a lot is permission. And I think so much we have to see things to believe it and see things to give ourselves permission. And that's what's so great about people like Amber Carnes, people like Jessamine Stanley, people who show their bodies very, overtly and publicly online, because it not only shows people that you don't have to fit this stereotype to practice yoga, but it gives other people the permission. And when I show up, I do identify as a plus size yoga teacher, but I'm a small plus size. Really, when if you were to kind of label me, but in those specific videos or GIFs that you're referring to on my Instagram, it's also about showing that a posture can look different and it's still a posture. So downward facing dog against the wall or using the back of a chair is still downward facing dog. I don't even buy into this idea that it's an adjustment or it's a modification. It's not. It's your downward facing dog as it is today. That might be your downward facing dog forever. It might not, but it is today. And don't invalidate that. It's so yeah, and this is what I mean by affirming language, right? Like, though definitely those posts, I have people contact me to say, I didn't know it was okay that I could, make the pose my own, or do a version of the pose that suits me. So often I hear students say, that camp that I mentioned at the very beginning of our discussion about those that had tried yoga before and had a bad experience, they say to me things like, when I give them the permission to come to the mat with whatever capacity they have, use all the tools they can. I think Diane Bondi calls it, bring what you have, do what you can, I think is her motto, which is a great one to live by. And so when I give my students permission and then I almost hand the baton back to them and say, I hope you can give yourself permission. The amount of times they say to me, but I've been in a situation before where the motto was very much like, if you can't keep up, you shouldn't be here.
Right.
And that saddens me so much, because like, what then? We're only creating spaces for people who are, a slim proportion of the world. I find it very confusing, I have to say. Like, I find it very, very sad. It saddens me and it confuses me, because like, there could be so much good done in the world. People can feel so much better about themselves. So why would we reserve that for just a very slim proportion of the population?
This is confusing. If you think about the actual like yogic texts out there before, because there are no poses in those texts, like do some movement until you can sit in meditation, I think is basically what it's saying.
Yeah.
And we focus so much on that. And I want to call back to what you said earlier. Like, this is not in the average 200-hour. And I would challenge any of our yoga teachers who are listening who have a 200-hour. How could this really be baked into everything? Because I know going out from my 200-hour and teaching to bodies who had done yoga for years, usually, and then teaching in my own community where like this person just had knee surgery and this person can't have their head lower than their heart, like all kinds of things were showing up in my class. And I had to, like you said, learn the hard way, like learn as continuing education. Do you have any thoughts on that? If you were designing a 200-hour and there is a lot to fit in, what do you think those teachers could do to create one that had that message baked in?
Ooh, good question. Because it's almost not like I referenced earlier, where we did this kind of 4 hours, like an afternoon of just like this. So this is like the pregnancy part of the course. I don't even think it can just be something that's stuck on like that. It needs to be like the foundational principle that everything else is built on top of, right? Like, I don't know how else to explain that. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it needs to be the culture, not a component. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. I agree. I'm curious if our yoga teachers who are listening have a training like that or attended a training like that. I'd love to hear about those in the comments in our show notes, because that, or in our Facebook group, like tell us about those for sure. I think that's the discussion we need to be having for sure.
Yeah.
I know there are lots of things that we try and pull into a 200-hour, but making it accessible to all bodies just seems like that is the philosophy of yoga. You're right. Yeah. We've got something really backwards. It is sad and frustrating.
That's right. You're right. Like, that's exactly it. It's backwards. Like, what if we talked about the accessibility aspect first, and then everything else we learn needs to be threaded somehow back into this culture of accessibility, and how do we do that, as opposed to thinking of it in reverse, adding on at the end and working back. It really needs to be the foundational principle. And I only see that now, like years down the line. Everyone's at different parts of their journey, and there's no shaming here, because that really doesn't help anyone. But I would just encourage any teachers who believe themselves to be accessible or market themselves to be accessible, because I've been sorry to jump around here, but I can't tell you the number of classes that I've gone to as a student, both before I was qualified as a teacher and since, that market themselves as accessible or a good class for beginners. And I don't know in what world it's accessible for beginners.
Right.
And this isn't, I mean, I'm talking to you from Edinburgh in Scotland. So I'm not just talking about in the UK. I'm also talking about a lot of classes that I've gone to in the States. It seems to be other people's versions of what beginner is so much more advanced than what my version of beginner is. So yeah, it's and this is what students say to me is, but I've tried beginners classes before. So even that, that getting back to language and the terminology, we seem to be on very different pages as to what the entry for a lot of folks looks like. So if you are someone, as you say, who has an injury or a health condition, which is a lot of people, but also if you're older, which is another part of the population that we haven't discussed so far. It's accessibility is different than if you are already strong, flexible, able-bodied. It's a different entry point. Yeah.
This is really good. It's making me think that sometimes I'm just going to point at myself as a yoga teacher. Sometimes early on in my teaching days, I would just think, well, if everyone does yoga, then they'll be able to be mobile and more flexible and da-da-da. Like there was this journey and we'd all get there, as opposed to showing up every single day in the body that you're in and figuring out what is my yoga today. It has taken me years of injury and experience and pregnancies and many things to see the difference in that. But I don't know, my early days as a yoga teacher in my 20s, I did not have that perspective.
No. And me too. I didn't always have the kind of, I guess, awareness that I have now, because I remember back to when I began, and, downward facing dog was not a pose that you kind of built up to. It was just kind of it's just assumed everyone can, maybe unless you have a wrist injury, maybe, okay, you can't do it, but everyone else is when it's considered a rest pose. and I would even put child's pose in that. I have so many students that child's pose is nowhere close to being a rest pose, or a place to rest. But yeah, I too thought that. And the thing is, for me, downward facing dog isn't a rest pose. Child's pose is, but I've worked with enough people now to realize that, in different bodies, for whatever reason, and this is the other thing, you just can't tell by looking at a student, which is another thing that really, I suppose it's also because that crosses over into the coaching that I do in terms of how people's health is assumed by how they look, right? So if you're in a bigger body, you can't possibly be healthy. And if you're in a smaller body, you're automatically healthy. And I think the same with yoga. I think there's so many preconceptions. I've gone into, as I say, new classes, and it's been assumed that I'm a beginner. There's no way that people would just ever think that I would be a teacher. And and also, I've seen myself make assumptions and hold biases. And this is the work. This is the continuous work, both as a coach and as a teacher, to really try and be aware of what your biases are. And I love when my biases are proved wrong. When I hold an assumption about a new student and for whatever reason, I assume that something might be challenging to them, and actually they turn out to be really flexible or really strong or whatever. And it's very, it's just a great reminder for me that you just can't ever assume by looking at someone. This is why dialogue's so important with our students. Yeah, not assuming.
That's amazing. If our yoga teachers are wondering how they can take a class with you or work with you, how do they do that?
So they can find me. My website is just my name, GillianMcCollum.com. I also am on Instagram, Gillian McCollum. I currently, this year, as we've just come into 2021, I no longer do single drop-in classes. I took the decision over the holidays to show up this year in a slightly different format. So I'm currently running a 6-week yoga journey for my students. And I hope to continue doing that so that we are, so that there's a commitment there, so that we were discussing this earlier off mic, and if you don't mind, I'll just sort of recover that. What I'm realizing is there's so much that we can learn about ourselves, and I'm sure all your listeners are acutely aware of this anyway, but there's so much about the yoga practice that we learn about ourselves that is out with the poses and out with the postures. And what I'm learning is when students make a commitment to show up for 6 weeks, so once a week for 6 weeks, life's going to change throughout those 6 weeks. Even though we're in lockdown right now and every day feels like the same, our emotional capacity is going to be different every day. How we feel in our body is going to be different every day. And there's going to be some days within that 6 weeks that you're going to be really jumping for joy to get on your mat. But there's going to be other days where you just really are feeling a lot of resistance. And I think that's what's great about actually committing to this 6 weeks is how do we navigate the times when you're feeling really energetic and you really want to challenge and push the edge. And then other days where you feel like, all you can do is roll out your mat and lie down. And there's so many lessons to be learned and so many ways to be curious and to learn about ourselves in those times. So out with the poses, out with the postures, but just learning to be with those feelings of imperfection or inadequacy or, failure or whatever it is that the inner voice is coming up with in those times. Those, for me, are very much part of a yoga practice. And I think with a drop-in model, when you only show up when you are in that kind of space of vitality, let's say, then are we getting the full experience? So this is what I'm currently exploring with this 6-week model as opposed to the drop-in model.
I'm excited to hear how it goes. You're in the middle,
I'm
you
sure
said.
Enjoying it. So,
yeah.
And I think my students are too. So,
yeah. Well, then it's exciting. You were talking before we hit record about just the focus for each week. And I think that's also exciting when you can really find like kind of a sort of the intention for the day and really plan that out and build it out. And then I would encourage all of our yoga teachers who are listening who try the registered session model, honestly, just redo the same thing that you had planned. I had people sign up over and over again for the exact same. They were like, yep, I'm in. I want to do it all over again. And I thought, really? And they don't say, oh, I've already done this. Well, also the way I teach is like, I can barely repeat the same class. Like it's hard for me to stick to the script, but
yeah. But also too, someone said this to me really recently, like a couple of days ago, and it really stuck with me in that, you've maybe been doing yoga for years or your whole life, but you've never done yoga in this moment. And that really sticks with me, because I think, we might have all this experience and history and kind of knowledge and data that we've built up, but we can't assume that's all just going to land in this moment. Like, we've got to just take this moment for what it is and be curious about what we arrive on the mat with. So
that's so true. And I feel like that lands more than ever when we hadn't lived through a pandemic like this before. We hadn't lived in lockdown, or where all yoga is online. Like, there's so many things that we haven't. But I'm sure it's also true in a quote unquote regular year, regular day. That's amazing. I love that. Yeah. Is there anything else that you think you would tell the yoga teacher who's like, I'm just afraid to hit record and put this video out there of me doing yoga? Is there anything that you would say to them in terms of, like, I love how you said your message is bigger than your body. I love that. Is there anything else that might help them?
Yeah, I think my genuine belief, and maybe, I'd be interested to know what your listeners think of this, but my genuine belief is that, people are going to judge you. People are going to look at you through that critical eye. But for the most part, I genuinely believe people are going to be seeking out the things in you that they feel self-conscious about themselves. So if you're the yoga teacher who's showing up and you are really hyper conscious about your belly, for instance, you think your belly's too big or your belly's too round and it sticks out. But your student who's watching you might have a hang up about their arms. So all they're looking at is how toned your arms are. I think it's disproportionate how we think other people are judging us, but really it's because we're judging ourselves so heavily, right? And this is how I, if your yoga teachers are interested in working through that, like, how do they overcome that, right? And I always say to my clients that we're never, ever going to stop other people from judging us. People are always going to judge you, no matter how you are. If you have a flat stomach, if you have a round stomach, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be someone who's judging you. But that holds a lot less power if you're not judging yourself. So the mission or the goal isn't to try and stop other people from judging you. All you can really do is try and work through your own, well, in that case, probably your own internalized fat phobia. And once you start to dismantle that, other people's judgments just don't have the same hold, right? They just don't have they don't hold water. They don't have the same power. So yeah, those are the two things I'd say. Your message is bigger than yourself and your bodies. That's the first thing to remember. But also the second, like, people are going to be looking at you through their own lens, which is informed by their own hang-ups, their own inhibitions, not through your lens, which is like, hyper focused on whatever you're feeling shame around. So yeah, I don't know if that helps your listeners.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that helped me a lot, just thinking of this is completely off video. This is about the podcast. Like, I remember having the fears around putting myself out there on the podcast, and that's audio. It's like, what are people are going to judge what I say? And it was really when I was like, the message is bigger. I know my mission is to help yoga teachers. Yes, I'm going to mess up with my words. My editor knows she has to take a lot of those out. And I had to really get comfortable with being wrong sometimes and judging myself for like things that I've said, or letting go of that, because guess what? I have to put the next podcast out to help the yoga teachers out there. It's way bigger than me. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that so much. And I hope our yoga teachers feel that and share their audio or share their video or their blog. Writing is the same thing. It's
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But your imperfections and your, apparent flaws are just, it's what makes you human. It's what makes you inviting. It's what makes you welcoming. I know we're running out of time, but the last thing I would want to say is, I mentioned that I trained with Diane Bondi in her Yoga for All training, and I still follow her work so much because watching Diane on her mat practicing yoga, and I'm pretty sure she wouldn't mind me saying this, it's not perfect yoga. And that makes me want to get on my mat and practice yoga because it's not perfect. And it's like, watching someone who is so perfect and ticks all the boxes, for me, makes me pull away. It makes it feel less accessible. It makes it feel less inviting. It's the flaws and the imperfection that makes us think, well, actually, maybe I can do it. I won't be perfect either, but if she can do it and it's not perfect, then maybe I can give it a go. So, perfection's an interesting thing because we think making ourselves perfect is what's going to attract people and sort of magnetize people. But I actually think it's the reverse. I think it's the imperfections that draw people to us. And the perfection is almost like creating a barrier, right, between whoever you're teaching or coaching. It's it's what makes us human. It's what makes us connect.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Thank you for all of this today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'll make sure that we put links to your website and to your Instagram in our show notes. And yeah, just thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been great speaking with you. I loved it.
Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, I want to hear from you. Did you have a key takeaway in today's episode? And if so, what was it? You can share it on social media. You can send us a voice message. You can send us an email. I would love to hear what your key takeaways are. I know that I really gravitated towards this idea of having a sample class, and Gillian talking about this to make yoga less scary was such a good idea. I think we can all do that across the board, no matter what your specialty is. People hesitate to come to yoga when they don't know what it's about. I also want to check in and see, did you make this the freebie yet, Gillian? Thank you so much for all of your amazing wisdom today. And I realize this is not a consultation call, but I do really want to check in. I'm very curious if you have that freebie now set up on your website. And if so, let us know and we can all go check it out. This is another key takeaway, connected yoga teachers, that if you do make a sample class available, or maybe a small series or flow or audio or whatever, can you make that the freebie on your website? I think that's a brilliant idea. That way you're building your email list with people who are interested in your particular offering. And then from there, you can nurture that list and give them maybe more free content, or just tell them how they can sign up and work with you further. My other key takeaway, well, it's just I love how sometimes podcast episodes fit together like this so well. Gillian talked about the training that she took with Diane Bondi and Amber Carnes, and I'll make sure that we link to the training in our show notes. And as well, we've had Amber Carnes on the podcast before, but next week you get to meet Diane Bondi, who's amazing. And we're going to be continuing this conversation more along the lines of how can we make yoga more accessible for the students in Abundant Bodies. Also in the show notes, we're going to link to Gillian's amazing article, What is Body Positive Yoga? Go and check that out as well. And tell us in the comments of the show notes page, do you teach body positive yoga? Do you teach yoga for abundant bodies? Share with us in the comments of the show notes page. So to find that, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/218 and you can leave a comment there and tell us what you thought of today's episode or what you also offer in the world in this way. Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, it's time for me to sign off. Before I do, I want to give a little reminder to you, if you're listening in real time, that coming up soon is Mother's Day. And I wonder if there is some way that you can take care of yourself, nurture yourself on this day, or do something nurturing and caring for the earth, or a friend in your life who has shown you care and affection. Or maybe you are in a place in your life where you have a mom in your life, someone who you call mom or a motherly figure, and you can celebrate them in some way. I realize that not all of us have this, and I'm mindful of that when it comes around to Mother's Day. And so make this day whatever feels really good for you. I also want to give a shout out to my mom, who is a yoga teacher and a big supporter of the work that I do, even though she doesn't listen to the podcast that often. Maybe she's listening now, who knows? I also want to say a huge thank you to our team over here, Suzanne, Crunch, Sinead, and Erica, for making today's episode possible. And to you, listener, thank you so much for being here. You are my favorite listener. Don't tell anyone else that, okay? You really make the podcast possible, and I'm grateful each and every day thinking of how this podcast ripples out into the world in some way. Thank you to all of you who've left a review or sent a message or an email telling me the impact that it makes. Thank you also for sharing it out with other yoga teachers and other individuals in the world. That really means a lot. All right, how can we stay connected this week to ourselves, to our yoga practice, and to our community so that we can share the yoga that lights us up?